I've clicked onto the global tropical ORB for September the 10th, 2023. As is always the case in these videos, the thoughts expressed here are mine alone, and when making decisions ahead of any tropical cyclones, look towards your local weather office, local emergency management, and local tropical cyclone warning center. We've got several systems active today. We're going to be staying in the Atlantic for this entire video as all the activity really is kept here. Outside of a few invests in the Western Pacific, but those are not of any significant concern right now. Across the Atlantic, we have quite a few systems active, which is what you'd come to expect. It is the climatological peak of hurricane season. It's generally around the September 10th timeframe. And we have Hurricane Lee here north of the Leeward Islands. Good news is the forecast came true. The system has stayed north of there. Really, the main impact there in those islands is going to be some surf impacts, and that's going to be one of the big stories with Lee over the next week. As we're probably going to be dealing with Lee up towards late week and potentially in the weekend. And this weekend it could be a significant impact storm, but I'll get more into that in a little bit. We also have Tropical Storm Margot here in the eastern Atlantic, and this is going to continue moving northward and may well become a hurricane as it does so. Now, as we do get storms up here, we start to wonder, could they come towards the Azores? Now, the good news is with Margot, we are forecasting a ridge to take shape north of the storm, which should, as it comes north, block it from just coming directly east. We're expecting it to get blocked by this ridging, and it may actually stall here southwest of the Azores for a little bit before eventually tracking further north. We have Invest 97L, a very tight circulation that formed yesterday near the Cabo Verde Islands, and it has some brief chance of development, but as I've talked about several times, these smaller circulations can be very susceptible to the environment around them, and you can see there is some dry air from the Saharan air layer right behind it, and it has become more exposed today, and that may weaken it a little bit, but it could become a brief tropical cyclone if it does so. If it doesn't, its energy will get absorbed by another tropical wave that has emerged off the coastline of Africa today, and this could become our next hurricane in the Atlantic after Lee and Margot way down the line, eventually when it forms into the MDR. But that's way out there, and the good news is right now, current indications are that this system might try and gain latitude similarly to Lee, but we'll have to talk about that maybe in the future, but we're not going to talk about it today. Today's video is focusing on Hurricane Lee, and let's go ahead and get a close-up loop. Now, it has been an interesting several days with Lee. It peaked as a Category 5 a couple of days ago. Recon did confirm that it peaked with about a wind of 165 miles per hour. That did give us a new record. We've had every major basin this year have a Category 5 a cyclone, typhoon, or hurricane happen. We just had one in the East Pacific, Hurricane Hova, that reached, I believe, an official peak of 160 or 165 miles per hour. That may have been much stronger than that. We have some satellite imagery from that. Without the angle of GOES 18, that may suggest that system was a bit stronger than maybe the official peak may say. But either way, it's a Category 5 in there, and now Lee was a Category 5. Now, the forecast was that Lee was forecast to stay a Category 4 or 5 hurricane really throughout the weekend, and things had changed after that Category 5 peak. We had some shear that was a bit stronger than forecast, and I can show you that in a little bit. But today we're seeing improvement. We're seeing signs that the shear is starting to let up from Lee, and we're starting to see signs that this system is starting to re-intensify. In fact, we are seeing the system re-intensify. We have Recon in there. They have confirmed that this is once again a major hurricane. It dropped below that for a little bit, but now it's a major hurricane again. But you can see earlier today we had a lot of the convection staying on the south side of the core, and the core, the inner core structure, you can see is right there. But in recent hours, we've seen these convective bursts wrap around successfully up shear around the northern part of the eye. And now we have a much more well-developed eye structure here. We don't just have all the cold cloud tops on the southern side of the eye. It's now more surrounding the eye. And this is a good step for Lee if it wants to intensify some more. And we have seen some intensification. You can see here is the Recon plane. You can see they went in, they found the pressure of about 956 millibars. That has not changed much, really, over the past couple of days. But we have had more stronger winds in the northeastern side. The maximum flight level wind was about 112 knots. That's near 130 miles per hour. And I think the max SFMR wind was 100 knots, just about there. So that's about 115 miles per hour. Blending that data gets you a pretty solid support for a major hurricane here. So this is likely a major hurricane again. Now, the recon plan has not updated in about an hour from the time that I'm recording this. So there might be stronger winds somewhere in here, but we don't know. I'm sure the National Hurricane Center is still getting that data. So if there are stronger winds, they'll put that in their next advisory package coming on about an hour or two after this video comes out. But other than the convection wrapping around the eye, we are also seeing the outflow on the northern side has always been pretty expansive. But on the southern side, it has been restricted, and I can show you why. We've had a displaced upper level anticyclone, and this was not forecast all too well. At least the sheer, I guess the magnitude of it was not as strong on modeling as it actually came out to be. But you can see this general flow from this ridge being displaced is pushing against the storm from the south. So we had that pressure being put onto it, and you can see in the sounding from one of our HAFS models that we had, it wasn't overly strong, but we had some significant shearing, and this was at about this morning, still some significant shearing there, especially from the steering flow overall. But this is weakening, and one way we can tell that it's weakening is look at the south side, particularly upper level cirrus. Notice as we are getting all these convective bursts wrapping around the eye, we're starting to see more and more outflow expand away on the south side of Lee. This may indicate that that shear is weakening, and this would be as expected by a model. This is the HAFS model again. This is tomorrow morning, late tonight, and you can see that the mid to upper level flow has weakened a little bit on this chart. So the shear is overall weakening a little bit. It's not a great weakening trend because the winds aren't really that strong even in this sounding, but it's just enough to allow Lee to re-intensify. And now this re-intensification is really key to seeing exactly, what Lee may, I guess, how strong it may be when it makes this northward turn. Now, the good news is we are not expecting this system to be a major hurricane at all when it comes northward towards, say, Bermuda or Canada or the US. The water temperatures and the environmental conditions will just deteriorate as it comes northwards. The good news here is we have Franklin to thank here, as there is some upwelled waters near Bermuda that Lee will most likely track over, and that will likely weaken the storm after whatever it peaks out here. Now, the strong intensity out here, I mentioned it is important still, because a stronger storm out here, obviously it disrupts the ocean a lot more, and it pushes a lot of water as a stronger storm. Now, it's important to remember that when these storms weaken, all that energy, it just doesn't go away. All the water that's moved around, it has to go somewhere. So when you have this storm coming north, and keep in mind, this system is also going to grow with potential eye wall replacement cycles as it comes north, all that water that's pushing here, as a category 4 potentially hurricane, that's probably going to be pushing similar water totals towards Bermuda, and it could be pushing water equivalent of a category 3 hurricane up when it comes into Canada or the northeastern United States. Now, the good news here for the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos and the Caribbean islands, our forecast seems to be holding true. We're not expecting significant impacts here. The system is not forecast to come too far west to where it would impact you all in the Turks and Caicos and Bahamas. We're expecting a pretty sharp turn north, and the reason being this large-scale trough that you can see over the United States digging in. And this will be progressing eastwards over the coming week, and this will turn Lee northward. Now, exactly how far east or west it is when it makes this turn does dictate exactly where, say, Bermuda gets impacts, or potentially the long-term track of where it goes. Potentially, could it get close to the U.S.? Could it come towards Bermuda, and maybe by then, being further east, come towards Atlantic Canada? Now, regardless of the exact track, we are seeing some increase in confidence that the system may come towards Atlantic Canada, particularly Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, and potentially we could see some adverse impacts in the northeastern United States. Now, this is a HAFS model. This is the same one from the soundings that I showed you earlier. And I'm going to play this out. I'm going to go to the radar because I want to show you why the storm gets bigger. I told you about the eyewall replacement cycles. Of course, these are difficult to predict, but we can get a gauge that these systems, especially as they get towards higher intensities, they typically do go under eyewall replacement cycles. Lee was a bit weird. It had some shear, but it also yesterday did have an eyewall replacement cycle. And Hova, when it got to its intensity of peak intensity, is what I'm trying to say there, it went through an eyewall replacement cycle. It's usual for category 4s and category 5s to go through these replacement cycles. And you can see some of these are forecast on the HAFS model. You can see in some of these frames we have what appears to be concentric eye walls on the model. Now, what these do is they do weaken the storm, and that is good because you weaken the max winds down, but they can be deceiving. And I've talked about this several times before that through these eyewall replacement cycles, the winds come down because the system is getting more broad overall. So while I will go back to the beginning and I'll go to the wind field, you'll see that overall things are pretty compact here. All things considered, with the 50 knot and 64 knot wind fields here, they're pretty compact overall with the hurricane. Now, as I go in time through the eyewall replacement cycles, you'll notice these hurricane wind fields and the significant wind fields get much, much larger. And to the time we get to 5 days, this is a massive storm now. You've got hurricane force winds extending pretty far away from the center. And look at this significant, and by significant, I mean 50 knot wind field. That is massive here. And that could cause a lot of issues for areas like Bermuda and Atlantic Canada and the United States. And you can see just how large that is relative to the United States and Bermuda. Bermuda on this track, on this model, it actually has it pretty far west. You still get tropical storm force winds, which it proves just how big the system is by this point. But keep in mind, this could still trend east and you could still get solutions. We've had solutions. In fact, we have solutions on modeling that has us a little bit closer to Bermuda, and that could increase your strong wind threat. But notice just how big this wind field is. And like I said with the water that it pushes down here, it's got to go somewhere. And if it's up here with this large of a wind field, all that water is still going to be pushed around. And alongside that, even if you're not in the direct path of the system as it comes north for storm surge with water impacts, you still have to deal with the waves from the system. And I'll go to the GFS for this. I didn't pull this up, but I can do this real quick. If we go to, I guess, to the North Atlantic view, and if we go to the significant wave height, look at how expansive the big waves are here. And you can see the expanse of 15-foot plus waves. And this is impacting a large region. In fact, as it's here west of Bermuda, there's still significant wave heights in the Bahamas, the Jersey Caicos, and the Caribbean islands. And alongside that, along the entire eastern seaboard of the United States and into Canada, you're having significant wave heights. And you may not think of that as a big impact, and certainly compared to a hurricane making landfall, it's not as big of an impact, but we could certainly lose lives through that. Just through rip currents, and we have seen those before, and we just want to avoid those as much as possible. Now, in terms of the overall steering, things have remained pretty clear since my last video. We talked about how there would be this subtropical ridge carrying the system west, but there would also be increased troughing in the eastern United States. I showed off that one in the upper levels over the United States, and you can see the general troughing here over the United States. So this general pattern has evolved like we talked about it would. Now, as it comes north, you'll notice there's the big trough, and there is still a bit of uncertainty on exactly how far west or east this goes on its track northwards. We've seen differing solutions of where the system comes relative to Bermuda, and that is something that we may have to watch for, exactly how far west or east it is from Bermuda. That is a good launching point for exactly how far east or west it may get relative to Canada or the United States. But you'll notice as we go through time, this trough has picked up lee, and it is tracking north at this time. But this trough is also quickly leaving the scene. And we talked about how the European had showed something like this in its earlier runs. This seems to be an opinion that the GFS and the European are agreeing on, that this first trough will begin to move out pretty quickly. And behind it, there will be a short period of ridging building before this second trough over central Canada digs in and pulls it back further north into Atlantic Canada. And you'll see that here. You can see as the trough moves now south of Greenland, it's here, we have a little bit of ridging building. And you'll notice that on this run, the storm slows down, and it also starts to come a little bit northwest because of this increased ridging here. Now, the good news is in this run, this trough is moving pretty fast. Everything here is moving quite fast here. So this trough comes in, erodes the ridge, and carries the system into Atlantic Canada. That's good news for the US, I should say. For Atlantic Canada, this is just bad news all around. But keep in mind, that's a very close pass for the northeastern United States, and I can show you the winds that you might be experiencing there. That's a very significant storm surge event potentially for areas in the Northeast, and that's a very significant wind event there. That may be similar to one of the stronger nor'easters that you may have in the wintertime. And that is a very real threat here, that we may have a significant hurricane sitting offshore, getting pretty close to the northeastern United States. And I know I've seen a lot of people posting online that Lee was going to be an out-to-sea storm. It was going to be this storm that it was going to be a fish, and we didn't have to worry about any impacts here. But that was a thought that was very early on, and a thought that was not accounting for, rather, the potential uncertainties that we had in the pattern over North America. There was a lot of uncertainty, like I talked about in that video a couple days ago with Lee. And I'll show you the European here before I go. You can see the general pattern is the same here, with this trough coming in. It picks up lee. I'll annotate this. It picks up lee. It starts to come north. And we have the same general picture on the GFS. This part of the trough lifts northward pretty quickly. We get a little bit of ridging behind it. The system may slow down at this time. It doesn't come northwest on this run too much, but here's this secondary trough. It comes in and carries lee north into Nova Scotia. And you can see the overall area between the GFS and the European, not that far off in terms of location. That's a pretty significant agreement there a week out. Now, of course, things can still evolve here. There's still uncertainties on exactly how this pattern will evolve. We'll have to exactly see how the models dictate this, and we'll have recon going out over the next, I imagine, next week, and we'll likely get some, alongside the low-level recon, some upper-level recon to where they can fly around the Western Atlantic and get some important data on the ridge and trough that we need to get the track right. And the good news is we have lots of surface observations here over North America. That will also come in handy for these models for figuring out this overall pattern. But for those in Bermuda and northeastern United States and Atlantic Canada, you need to make sure your hurricane preparedness kit is ready. This is a time just to watch the storm. And of course, make sure you stay tuned to local weather offices and reliable sources. Stay tuned to the National Hurricane Center, as they're going to have the best information on their advisory packages. And of course, the National Weather Service offices, like I mentioned, they're going to have the best local information for your local area. Finally, here's the National Hurricane Center forecast cone. You can see that general track, as we talked about, generally heading west, and then that sharp turn northwards here southwest of Bermuda. And you can see this exact location of where it is, east or west of Bermuda. That's going to be still in question for a couple more days, and this will dictate exactly how the storm tracks further north. and we'll be watching this very closely over the coming days. So stay safe in areas all along the Caribbean islands and the United States, and make sure you have your hurricane preparedness kit ready ahead of Lee. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching.